First rule of 50 Shades is never talk about 50 Shades. No, wait, that's the wrong movie. Hello everyone, I'm Sarah from Everyday Starlet. Welcome to my channel. I make videos to inspire you to be the star of your own life. I'm continuing my Masculine Feminine Energies film breakdown series with a requested film, 50 Shades of Grey. If you're not familiar with what I mean by Masculine Feminine Energies, I talk about this in many videos in much more detail, but a brief summary. Masculine Feminine Energies are energies that live within all of us. We all contain both energies. We all have a core energy. This is when we're most ourselves in. That energy often links up with our gender. It doesn't have to, but it very often does. And we can be in wounded or healed versions of either of these energies. And each of these energies contains archetypes. And we all contain all of the archetypes within us that we can tap into whenever we need to. I have a lot of videos about the masculine and the feminine archetypes. And in order to have sexual polarity in a relationship, you need one partner to be in the masculine and one partner to be in the feminine. Because opposite energies attract sexually and same energies repel sexually. So let's get into 50 Shades of Grey. And I really wanted to wear something gray for this video. And I used to wear gray all the time. I couldn't find anything gray to wear. So I went with black. I thought like a spiked collar, BDSM, I don't know, whatever. So 50 Shades of Grey was a requested film. And it was actually requested, it was one of the first film requests I ever got, like back when I first started doing these breakdowns. And to be honest, I had never seen any of the 50 Shades of Grey movies. It's interesting how when I kind of put it out there, like, okay, who wants me to do a breakdown of 50 Shades of Grey? Should I just do the first movie? Should I do all three? Like, what should I do? I got such a polarized response. Like, it was crazy. Like, some people were like, yes, do them all, we love them. And some people were like, no, please don't even watch the movies because they're so bad, they're so terrible. I feel like this whole 50 Shades phenomenon has people very divided. Like, some people are obsessed and some people are like angry it even exists. So I actually finally sat down and watched the movie. Now, I watched the first one. I should have known that Hollywood was gonna do this. I kind of thought that it was kind of like movies in the past where the first movie was like a standalone movie and then the sequels were kind of like an afterthought, like a continuing story. That's not what this is. So I only had time to watch the first one to film this breakdown, but in reality, if you haven't seen the movie, in typical modern day Hollywood fashion, these movies are really meant to be really long episodes in like a 3-part series. So when the first one ended, I was just like, what happened? I don't know, like, it gets you hooked. Whether or not you're into the movie or not, you kind of feel like, okay, I have to watch the next one because I need to know what happens, right? I don't know if I'm gonna watch the next one or the next two. I haven't decided that yet. I didn't have time to do that for this breakdown. So this particular breakdown is just going to be of the original 50 Shades of Grey movie, like the first episode in the trilogy. I don't know why when I say trilogy, I think of like Lord of the Rings or something. And I suppose there were rings they was tying rope around. I don't know, whatever. Anyway, okay, so after having watched 50 Shades of Grey, the original movie, for the first time, I get why people like the movie and I get why people don't like the movie. So I'm kind of in the middle. Like, dialogue and the acting are kind of meh. Like, it's not really a great movie, but I kind of get the sensationalism of it. It's kind of edgy. It's kind of out there. Like, I mean, to be honest, like I can't watch porn. It's not my thing. It's never been my thing. But like, even if it was my thing, like, I can't handle the bad storylines, the bad acting, like, I can't. And so you watch 50 Shades of Grey and I'm like, well, it's not as bad as porn. So I will say the breakdown I'm gonna do is just gonna be on the masculine and feminine energies in 50 Shades of Grey and just on the first movie. So if I say something in this breakdown that contradicts something that comes up in the next two movies, I haven't seen those. I'm just literally looking at the first movie, and I also haven't read the books. I have no idea how much the story actually lines up with the books or anything that I'm about to say, whether or not it actually applies to the book or whether it doesn't. I don't know. Literally just going by the original 50 Shades of Grey film. And I also want to say too, nothing I'm gonna say in this video is meant to kink shame anybody. It's not meant to judge anyone's sexual interests or preferences or anything like that. I'm a firm believer in, you know, consenting adults should have the freedom to choose what they want to do with their bodies. So none of this is meant as like a shame or judgment on any kind of BDSM or kink community or anything like that. I'm gonna touch a little bit on that topic as it pertains to masculine and feminine energies. I will say I don't have personal experience with BDSM or kink or things like that. I have read a lot of books and information, you know, in my feminine energy sexuality journey. And I'm a part of a lot of women's groups that do talk about those topics a lot. So I have a lot of, I would say, like secondhand knowledge about things like kink, BDSM and stuff, but I don't have personal experience with that. So full disclosure, if anyone's watching this and you do actually have like, you know, kink, BDSM experience or things like that, some of the things I say may resonate, they may not. I'm not coming from like having firsthand experience with that. Just want to let you know. And I've read erotic novels and I've seen some movies that are based on some erotic novels and things like that. I have to say, I've seen some that are better than this. I actually was part of this like women's workshop where there were some books and movies and things like that that were recommended that had to do more with BDSM, and the person running the group was not a 50 Shades of Grey fan. So I have to say I've seen some and read some that are better than this. But I also want to acknowledge that like this movie, 50 Shades of Grey, it's a female fantasy. And I know a lot of people are going to say that this is unrealistic. It's a fantasy. Fantasies don't have to be realistic, right? And how many Hollywood movies are actually realistic? Let's be real. And the fact that we have like billion-dollar porn industries that cater to male fantasies, I don't really know if there's all that much harm in having a movie trilogy that happens to be a female fantasy. Is it unrealistic that, you know, some 27-year-old billionaire is going to give you a safe space to, you know, enjoy your sexual fantasies or whatever? Christian Grey is a fantasy character, and, you know, for some women, not every woman fantasizes about this particular storyline, but you know, enough women obviously, so they were willing to make it into a movie. It's a female fantasy. With all of the male fantasies that we basically cater to in our society, why not have a female fantasy? It's pretty tame, to be honest. At least the first movie, pretty tame, I gotta be honest with you. For the hype and the hoopla that everybody made about this movie being so edgy, it was like, I don't know, I think it's pretty tame compared to even just stuff you see on social media randomly nowadays. Maybe I'm just desensitized to this stuff, which is probably a concern. But anyway, I've heard people describe it this way before, and I think this is pretty accurate, where the concept of dominant and submissive in, you know, sort of sexual play is really an exaggerated version of, an exaggerated fetishized version of masculine feminine energies. And I say that because masculine feminine energies are something that is like within us, right? It's truly like, it's who we are, it's part of us. Whereas the idea of dominant and submissive in the sexual play is really taking on a role. Now, that's not to say that there aren't people who are dominants or submissives who have some of those energies within them, like some of them actually embody that within them. And I'm not saying that that's not true. Of course, people can actually feel like they embody those, and there are people who naturally lean more towards being a dominant and some people who lean more towards being a submissive. And honestly, in any sexual experience, you kind of have like a dominant, you have a submissive, you have a masculine pole and a feminine pole. That said, somebody could be feminine at their core and play the role of a dominant, and somebody could be masculine at their core and play the role of a submissive. Like when you're in that sexual play, you're playing a role, and now that role may be part of who you are as a person, but you are playing that role. So that's why I'm kind of saying it's like a fetishized, exaggerated version of that. In general, like generally speaking, if somebody is masculine at their core, they're probably going to have a desire to be more dominant sexually. And if someone is feminine at their core, they're probably going to have a deeper desire to submit to somebody sexually, to sort of be taken sexually. I talk about this a little bit more in my Belle de Jour breakdown about female sexual fantasies and things like that. And I've had people ask this question before, actually. I mean, there are men who are very masculine at their core who like to play around with occasionally in the bedroom being the submissive and having somebody dominate them. There are women who are very feminine at their core who sometimes like to tap into that dominatrix part of them, that dominant part of them, and dominate a partner. I don't want anybody to get too caught up in the idea of, okay, if I want to experience this particular energy sexually, that means that I must be that energy completely, or that must be who I am, or that must be who I want to be all the time. It's not like that. And I also think too, I've had people get caught up in this, that like men think that if they want to be dominated in the bedroom or something like that, that automatically makes them gay or something like that. You know, I mean, everybody has their boundaries, everybody has their lines, everybody has their desires and wants and needs, and none of my content advocates promiscuity. It's not my thing, it's not my vibe, it's not something that I think is really beneficial for men or women in society. However, if you are in a long-term relationship with somebody, say, and you know, you kind of have your general things sexually that you do with each other because that's sort of your natural state. Like one of you is maybe naturally slightly more dominant, one of you is naturally slightly more submissive. Even if it's just a, you know, a subtle polarity and you're not really playing in any kink area or anything, I don't see anything wrong with trying something different, with playing around with a different energy, with switching energies for a night and just seeing how that feels. Honestly, one thing I think that all of us can really learn from the kink and BDSM community is communication. Like the idea of openly communicating about sex, about what your yeses are, what your nos are, what your maybes are. You know, there's so much communication, and I understand that, you know, very oftentimes you're playing in things that you need that communication because you need everybody to be on the same page, you need everybody to be safe, you need to have safe words, you need to have, but I don't see why we shouldn't have those things in regular sexual play. I mean, I really do think that it would actually solve a lot of communication problems if people were open about communicating their yeses and nos before they had sex. Because when you're trying to communicate that in the moment, like you get two people, especially when you get two people who are like drunk at a party and you go to have sex, and then at the end it's like you get the woman who's like, well, I didn't really want to do that, and men are like, well, I thought you were into it, you didn't say no, but maybe she had a freeze response and it was a trauma response, she didn't know how to say no, or maybe she was afraid to say no, or maybe she did and he just didn't pay attention, and alcohol gets involved and it gets, you know, that's a whole other topic. If you're willing to have sex with somebody, like you're willing to be that intimate with somebody, but you're not comfortable enough talking about what your yeses and nos are, like we have such terrible communication around sex in general. I really do think we can learn something from like the kink and BDSM community of actually being willing to sit down. Like even if you're just gonna have, you know, whatever they call it, quote unquote vanilla sex, and because there's always a vulnerability there. Like sex is never 100% safe. Like there's always vulnerability when you have two people getting together in that kind of an intimate setting. Even if you're not playing with like ropes and chains and floggers and whatever, if you're just having regular sex, you should be able to sit down and say, okay, these are my yeses, these are my nos, this is what I'm comfortable with, this is how I'm gonna let you know, or this is how I'd like you to let me know when something is going well or when it's not. And I think very often when we're having, you know, all of these like promiscuous situations with, you know, drugs and alcohol, you know, alternative substances and things like that, we don't really know people. That's where communication breaks down, and you get a lot of people who are like, well, I didn't really want to do that, and the other person's like, well, I didn't know you didn't want to do that. I mean, there is something to the idea that like if you're willing to have sex with somebody, you should be willing to communicate with somebody about sex, right? And if you're not comfortable communicating with somebody about sex, maybe you're not really ready to have sex with that person. Anyway, that's my little rant about what we can learn from the BDSM community, because I do think that that's, you know, they have that down, you know what I mean? I mean, not everything is gonna be this whole big contract non-disclosure agreement that like Christian has. You know, it's pretty elaborate, but you know, hey, he's like he said, it's to protect him, it's to protect her, it's to make sure that everybody's okay. Most people probably know at this point what the concept of 50 Shades of Grey is. You have Christian Grey, who's like this 27-year-old billionaire business phenomenon, and Anastasia Steele, who meets him and they kind of enter into this relationship. Now Anastasia is in college and she ends up interviewing Christian for like a school newspaper. She's actually doing it to help out a friend. Their initial interaction is really interesting because Anna's a very feminine character. She's young though, right? Like she's a virgin, you find out. You know, young, she's in college. She's still figuring herself out. She's very much in like a maiden. She's very much in her maiden archetype. She's kind of a hopeless romantic. She's an English lit major. She doesn't really know where she's going with her life or what she's gonna do with her life. She's a little bit awkward. She isn't really fully stepped into her feminine energy. Like she's a very feminine woman. She's a very feminine character, but she hasn't really stepped into that yet. She hasn't really stepped into the fullness of her feminine energy. She's still a little bit in that sort of girlish phase where she hasn't really stepped into womanhood yet. And Christian is a very, I would say he's a very masculine character in general, at least in his business sense. He's very focused, he's very detail oriented, he's structure. They have this interview and Anna's kind of fumbling. She doesn't know what she's she's doing, and Christian is very fascinated with her. The more masculine a man is, the more fascinated he's going to be with a feminine character. I know a lot of people want to make the argument that it's like, okay, well, she was just like a broke college student working in a hardware store, and, you know, it's because she was beneath him, you know, and she wasn't one of these high-achieving women. But let's be real, Christian can have any woman he wants. Her not having money, or her not really have figured herself out or being successful, wasn't really necessarily the appeal for him. The appeal for him was, and then Anna was, first of all, she's very real. She's very unassuming. She's very unpretentious. She wasn't calculated. She wasn't perfect. She was messy. She was all over the place. In fact, when I was trying to find clips for this, somebody pointed out that they were like, oh my god, how bad are her bangs? Like, it's just her hair in general. Like, she was kind of a mess. It's the polar opposite to what he is. He is very structured. He's very serious. He's very intense. He's very polished. He makes a comment about how people don't think he has a heart. She kind of sees him and taps into her intuition, and she makes some comments. She's not afraid of him. She's intimidated by him, but she's not afraid to speak her mind and just kind of say what she wants to say. She's kind of awkward. She admits she doesn't think she fits in there. He kind of offers her an internship. She's like, look at me, I don't really fit in here. Like, she's not putting on airs. It's that lack of pretension. It's that lack of a need to be perfect. He's surrounded by all these secretaries who are all polished, perfect. That's part of the appeal, right? That's part of her, you know, she's playful, you know what I mean? And she has an intuition to her. Like, when Christian says something like, well, what do you want to know? What do you want to ask? And she says something about, when you say people who know you well, why do I get the impression that people don't know you well, or something like that. Like, she's kind of tuning into him. Like, she's using her intuition. She's got a lot of feminine qualities to her. She just haven't fully flourished yet, which takes time. That takes time, and it takes age. One of the reasons why I have a video about the value of older women, and I talk about, you know, women really do, if left to their own devices, would become much more feminine and tap into more of their feminine energy if society hadn't tried to kill that in us. But Anna's definitely on that path where she can very much become a very, very feminine woman if life doesn't really get in the way. Like, if she ended up, you know, working as an intern and trying to fit in with Christian's world, so to speak, and having to, like, be polished and perfect and be that, like, structured executive, she probably would be suppressing a lot of that feminine energy. She does have a few areas throughout the movie where her feminine energy is not fully tapped into yet. She is kind of like a little bit uptight, and then she loses her virginity to Christian. She really does, like, loosen into her sexuality and her sexual flow. Let's be real. In real life, like in reality, there might be some women out there who are gonna say, yes, I had my first sexual experience, it was beautiful, it was wonderful, and like I felt like such a woman and it changed me, and I all of a sudden was like tapped into my sexuality. And I'm sure there are women out there who may have had that experience. Most women have not had that experience, right? Most women did not automatically have sex with a man, even if it was the most wholesome, like it was on your wedding night and it was a beautiful moment, it was the man that you love. Like, most women don't automatically have sex for the first time and then all of a sudden are like, oh, I'm so tapped into my sexuality. Like, that's not common, right? Most women, you know, need some time to actually tap into that. Like, most women don't automatically, like, lose their virginity and become a sexual goddess, right? I mean, that's something that usually for most women they need to get comfortable with, and it evolves over time. So if you're a woman out there and you watch this movie and you were like, oh my god, she had an amazing first sexual experience, and then she all of a sudden became this like flowy sex goddess, and like, oh, why didn't that happen for me? That doesn't happen for every woman. Unfortunately, it'd be great if it did, but it doesn't happen for every woman. But again, this movie is a fantasy. And also, Anna's very blocked from receiving. She has a hard time with receptivity. Christian actually gifts her some very expensive first editions of some books that he knows that she'll love. She loves them, but she's very uncomfortable. Like, she's uncomfortable with him giving to her. It was a beautiful gift, right? I mean, so many men would just give, you know, flowers or, you know, candy or jewelry or something that's very common, like just a regular ordinary gift, and he gave her something that was so personal that he knew that she would love. That's beautiful. That for me was like probably the sexiest part of the whole movie. Just the fact that the sexiest part of this movie about BDSM was a man giving a woman books that he knew she would love, and like a really personalized beautiful gift. That probably says something about me. I don't home. Like, I don't care about the ropes and floggers and whatever. He gave her books? Like, oh my God. He gives her a car later on and stuff, and she's very uncomfortable with the idea of like receiving a car from him. You know, she's very uncomfortable with that receptivity. He's in his masculine. The masculine is giving. The masculine is providing. And you know, Anna is still not fully comfortable with the idea of actually receiving from him. She enjoys receiving from him sexually, but she's not really fully okay with receiving from him in other ways. That block from feminine receptivity, very common nowadays, extremely common nowadays. And this isn't about being a gold digger. This isn't about, like, she wasn't demanding things from him. She wasn't like, buy me this, give me this or that or whatever. She, you know, he wanted to give to her, and she was hesitant to receive, you know. And if you're a woman and you're hesitant to receive a beautiful gift that somebody gives you, you're probably blocked from receiving compliments. You're probably blocked from receiving anything, joy, abundance, love. You're gonna be blocked from those other things. That's why it's really important as women for us to really work on that, being open to receive. Now, if a man is giving you something and it's making you uncomfortable, because this man is making you uncomfortable, or you know, you're feeling like he's giving you something because he's trying to get something from you, and you know, that's a different story. But being open to receive from people who just genuinely want to give, being open to receive from the masculine, because a truly healthy masculine man is going to want to give to you. It's not going to have an attachment to, I'm going to give to you just so I can control you, but he's going to want to give. The masculine gives. I mean, it's literally biology. If you look at basic biology, the masculine literally like gives of himself to the feminine, and she receives what he gives her, and she creates, you know, new life. I mean, that the masculine provides and the feminine creates what he provides and makes it better. It's like a man buys a house, the woman makes it a home. The man buys food, the woman makes it into a meal. The man gives sperm, the woman makes a baby. Like, it's all of those beautiful things. That's masculine feminine dynamics. Like, the masculine gives, the feminine receives. Now, you don't have to receive from just any man who gives to you if you're not comfortable with it, or if it's a man that you just, you know, you have allowed to have boundaries around those things. However, if you're completely blocked off from receiving anything from a man, you're gonna have a really hard time having a really strong polarized relationship. If you can't receive gifts from him, are you really gonna be able to fully receive pleasure from him, receive from him sexually? Now, of course, in this movie, because it's a fantasy, she's comfortable receiving from him sexually, but not receiving from him, you know, financially or with gifts or things like that. Isn't that a Hollywood fantasy where the woman's like, no, don't buy me stuff, don't provide for me, but like give to me sexually? That, I mean, that's a male fantasy right there, is what that is. That to me is where it taps less into the female fantasy and more into a male fantasy, but that's beside the point. It's trying to make the woman look like not a gold digger, because, you know, we don't want to have a society where women are comfortable receiving from men, because that would be a shame, wouldn't it? Like I said, Christian is a very masculine character. He is, you know, he's very structured, he's very disciplined, dominant person. He dominates the room, he takes control, he takes charge, he likes to have things his way. Some of it could actually go into the wounded masculine, that needing to control, that idea that like Anna has to be his. I understand that some of that is the sexual play, but I wouldn't necessarily call him an overly wounded masculine character. Like, he's obviously very masculine at his core, but I do see it, at least in the first movie, I see it dancing a little bit into the wounded. I will give it to him that he is very aware of his role in making Anna feel safe. So he's very much like, anytime you want to leave, anytime this is too much, anytime this is too far, making sure she knows her safe words. He's very aware of wanting her safety to be a priority, and that I will give him a lot of credit for. I know there's a lot of people out there who kind of criticize this movie as it being a glorifying men abusing women. We'll get into that a little bit later, but he is very, very open about his sexual interests, wants to make sure she's aware of all of them. He has a really deep need to make sure that she is informed, that she is, you know, knows how to express when she's not comfortable. He lets her know, like, look, anytime you want to leave, the helicopter's waiting, like, you know, we can take you away from here. Like, he's very clear with that. So I will give him that. His masculine need to make sure that the feminine is safe and feels safety and feels safe enough to open to him. I will give him credit for that. I do like that. Throughout at least the first movie, he seems to do a really good job of that. He's also very protective of her. You know, again, she gets a little bit drunk and ends up calling him. He finds out that she's drunk. He's worried about her safety, so he drops everything, comes to get her. He wants to protect her. He has a lot of rules, so to speak, if you're going to be with him. The rules to protect her. Now, are they overly structured? Yes, the masculine can very often be overly structured. It dances on that line of being wounded masculine, but if this was just a regular ordinary relationship, yes, it does get a little bit too much into the controlling of the feminine. Understanding that there is kind of like the dominant submissive aspect to it, it dances that line. Another aspect to this that is very masculine feminine is that Anna always wants more. She wants more. She wants to get closer. Whereas Christian is he pulls away a lot. Like, he pulls back. He has a lot of walls up. That's very common, I think, with the masculine feminine. When you have a very feminine woman, the feminine always wants more. It is what it is. Women are never fully satisfied. It's just what it is. When you fill up the feminine, she's always going to want more. That's just how we're designed. And for the masculine is much more about being emptied, right? I mean, if you think about it sexually, the feminine wants to be filled, the masculine wants to be emptied. I actually think it's pretty poignant. I mean, it's very abrupt. Writing in this is not phenomenal. In the scene when Anna and Christian are in the coffee shop, and Anna kind of makes a comment about how, you know, she's an English lit major, so she must be a romantic, you know what I mean? And then she kind of tries to get close to him, and he panics. He's like, I'm not for you. Like, I have to leave. And, you know, she's like, do you already have a girlfriend? Is that what it is? And he's like, I don't do the girlfriend thing. Like, I don't do the girlfriend. Like, he's very, like, pull away. She almost gets hit by a bike. He kind of protects her and stuff. And they have this, like, polarized moment. When the masculine protects the feminine, it's gonna polarize them. They're gonna come together. It's what it is. His masculine is coming out in that moment. So, you know, she's more drawn to him. He pulls away. He's afraid of the romance. He's afraid of his emotions getting involved. They have an argument actually at Christian's parents' house, and, you know, Anna's like, I want more. He's like, I don't do romance. I don't do hearts. I don't do, you know, flowers. I don't do this, whatever. Christian does do romance. Christian is romantic throughout most of the movie. Like, he doesn't do necessarily the traditional idea of romance, but he does do all of those romantic things for her. He's just afraid of getting close. That's very common with the masculine, is being afraid. Like, the feminine wants more. She wants to get close. She wants to get connected. She wants to feel him. And Anna's always trying to talk to him, to connect with him, to learn more about him. And Christian's like, no, I'm not going to share my feelings. I'm going to share my emotions. That's very common in masculine feminine dynamics. Again, this is written like a fantasy. So, of course, Christian has to be this, like, quiet, tortured soul. But in reality, most masculine men are not necessarily going to be as comfortable, like, spilling their guts emotionally as the feminine. Whereas as a feminine woman, she's going to be like, I want to know more. I want to connect. I want to feel the depth. I want to, you know, like that's normal. Like, that's all normal in masculine feminine dynamics. The fact that this movie is a little fluffy and written like a fantasy, you can kind of see the extremes of these situations going to come out in these characters. Anna stays very playful too. I mean, there's a really fun moment where they're dancing to like a Frank Sinatra song. It's Witchcraft. When Frank Sinatra sings Witchcraft, I love that. I just absolutely love that. He's got this polished, perfect home, and she's kind of being silly and playful and stuff like that. Like, that's very polarizing. You know, that feminine playfulness and contrast with the masculine structure is actually, like, it's really polarizing. You can see why these two would be very attracted to each other. Of course, Anna falls in love with him, and he says, you know, not to fall in love with him, but it's like, took her virginity. He's given her this dream life. He's, you know, sexually polarized to her. Of course she's gonna fall in love with him. Like, hello. I mean, she's a self-professed romantic. Like, he's being romantic. Of course she's gonna fall in love with him. Like, you'd have to be a complete moron to not think that this woman was gonna fall in love with you. And him saying, don't fall in love with me, is not gonna make her not fall in love with him. That kind of frustrated me, because I was just like, she's like, I'm in love with you. He's like, don't fall in love with me. It's like, well, hello, of course she did. Like, that's any woman that's that feminine, that's got that level of, the feminine's gonna have that romanticizing of things and the romantic side, the playful side. Like, of course she was gonna fall in love with him. The masculine is probably not gonna be as comfortable with that love, that feeling. He's probably gonna have a wall up to it. I know he makes a comment about, like, he's not trying to change her, that she's changing him. That's a fantasy line, I think. Like, that's kind of, women want to think that they're changing the man that they're with, that they're the one who can open him up. Like, they're the one that's gonna make him fall in love. There's something to that. At the end of the day, as a woman, you don't want a man who's, like, emotionally slutty. You don't want a man who's going to emotionally connect with just any woman. Like, you want to be the one woman that he shares that with. Think about it like this. For most men, they don't necessarily want to choose a woman who will just have sex with anybody. For most men, they want to believe that the woman that they're with is very selective about who she's going to have sex with. So when she chooses to have sex with him, it means something. It means that, you know, her choosing him means he's obviously like got something, like he's obviously a great candidate for having sex with, right? Women don't want a man who's emotionally slutty. Like, we don't want a man who's just going to any woman, you know, opening up and showing his feelings. Like, we want to know that when our man is connecting to someone, he's actually connecting to us. Like, we want to know that our man is going to open up to us, open up emotionally. We don't want him to be emotionally slutty and be sharing his life with a whole bunch of other women. It's actually interesting because, like, Anna doesn't really think too much about how many women Christian has been with until they sleep together for the first time. Now they've had sex. Now all of a sudden she's like, how many women have stayed in this room before? And he's like, oh, about 15. She's like, oh, 15. Like, she just lost her virginity to this guy. She's never been with anybody before. And now she's like, oh, how many other women have there been? That actually came up also in my Dirty Dancing breakdown when Baby had sex with Johnny, and it was like, all of a sudden it's like, oh, you do this with a lot of other women. Like, all of a sudden oxytocin kicks in, she's feeling attached to him, and she's like, oh, what about other women? What about that? Like, she's now feeling that attachment to him. It's also interesting how for most of the early part of their relationship, Christian seems to be able to just like drop everything and be with Anna, which for somebody who's like this 27-year-old billionaire, you're kind of like, really? He can just drop everything and just be with her at any minute of the day, which again, it's a female fantasy. But that said, at one point when he actually gets called away on business, he's got to deal with business, he's very like tightly wound. She shows up and she's like, well, I can leave you alone. He's like, no, meet me in the playroom in 15 minutes or whatever. None of what I'm about to say is to ever say that a woman should be having sex with a man if she is not a full-bodied yes to having sex with him. That said, when a man gets really even if he's living his purpose, like but he's really tightly wound, like he's had a really hard day, like even if he loves his job, he loves what he's doing, but he's just had a tough day, when he comes home, nothing is more healing and reviving to the masculine than feminine sexual energy. If the feminine can bring to the masculine that unbelievable healing and relaxing sexual energy when he needs it, I mean, that's the woman he's gonna be with. Like, that he's gonna want that sexual, whatever that sexual energy is in that moment, because sexual energy is so healing. I'm not at all saying that, like, okay, your man's had a tough day, he should be like, you know, taking out his anger and frustration on you sexually. That's not what I'm talking about. But that sexual energy, like being able to bring that feminine sexual energy to your partner when it will actually heal him, when it will revive him, like being able to do that for your partner, that's an incredible gift you can give to your masculine partner. It's one of the best gifts that the feminine can bring to her masculine partner. I will give it up to Anna, as much as she is a very feminine character, she does tap into her masculine when she needs to set boundaries. The meeting that she sets up to discuss the contract, she still kind of slips in a little bit of like her feminine Anna, like, what's a butt plug, like that kind of thing. But overall, like, she sets it up very structured. Like, she's got her boundaries, she's got her standards. And it's interesting how in that moment where she steps into her masculine, as far as being very structured and setting those boundaries, setting those rules, that's when Christian's kind of like, well, I'd like to add in a little bit of romance, like a date when you want it. Like, I'd like to add that in. When she steps into her masculine, he opens up to his feminine a little bit. He starts to tap into that like romance aspect of it. Again, it's kind of polarizing, you know what I mean? He's been very much in his masculine as the dominant. She steps into a little bit of that dominant energy, which I think, honestly, I mean, I kind of think when you are a woman, if you're having a difficult time stepping into your boundaries, like stepping into, at least mentally, your kind of like dominatrix self can actually help you with setting your boundaries. And Anna kind of does that, and Christian's a little bit more like, okay, I'm gonna soften a little bit now. We learned in the movie that Christian has been a submissive to a woman who was a female dominant, so he's got that aspect to him. That's actually very common in men who have a very masculine core. Sometimes they just want to let go and they just want to be submissive to somebody. That's not that uncommon. And it's nothing wrong with that. If you have a partner, say for example, if you are a man who's very masculine in his life, you are a very masculine man and you polarize into your life a very feminine woman, it's okay if you occasionally want to take on the role of being a submissive and you want your feminine partner to step into that role being dominant on occasion. And I think it can be great sometimes in a relationship to play around with switching those energies. However, if you're a masculine man in your life and you've polarized in a feminine woman and you only want to be the submissive sexually, a feminine woman is probably not going to be comfortable always having to be the dominant in the bedroom. There are people who are like, say, very masculine in their life but very feminine in their sexual life, and or vice versa. But it's really important to find a partner who's also polarized with you in that sense. And it's okay to switch up those energies once in a while, but if you're expecting one partner to always be sexually out of their natural core energy, that's gonna feel off. It's not gonna feel sexually polarizing. There's gonna end up being resentment. It's probably not gonna be able to sustain itself in a long-term relationship. And I know there's a lot of people that have issues with this movie, with the idea that Christian wants to be dominant. He wants to have control. Now, he's very good at letting Anna know what she's getting herself into. He does have a need to control, which is obvious. I mean, we hear about from his childhood, he has a lot of wounding. Really would be beneficial if he worked through that, not just sexually, but in other ways. But the fact that he's leaning towards wanting to like abuse or punish her, it's a fetish thing. I'm not here to kink shame or anything like that. Consenting adults, and that's what you're into. It's what you're into. You know, he says he's not a sadist, that he's a dominant, but there is kind of a scene, at least in the first movie, where he kind of flips into that little bit sadistic aspect to things. The masculine does have a much more comfort level with violence. Sometimes sex and violence are connected to each other, and obviously nothing should ever be not consensual. There are often women who have sexual needs. I mean, really, David Data describes it this way, as like the deepest sexual need of the masculine is usually to ravage someone. And the deepest sexual need of the feminine is to be ravished by someone, which is one of the reasons why some women do have rape fantasies. I mean, some women do. And it's not a desire to actually be assaulted. Like, fantasies are always consensual, right? Even when they're not consensual, they're always consensual. Having a fantasy about something being non-consensual is still, you're still consenting to the fantasy. Those kind of things that are sort of more taboo, they're not wrong. It's just a matter of, is everybody consenting to it? Is everybody being safe? Is it coming from a place of love? You know, I mean, and I know that might sound weird to some people, and again, I'm not here to convince anybody. Certain things sexually are just not your thing. That's fine. Like, none of this is meant to shame or judge anybody or tell anybody that they need to be into something. None of it is. It can be very natural for people to have desires that are more taboo, and I think if people want to play those out, but they want to play them out in a consensual situation where everybody is being safe and being very, I mean, you can do these things from a loving place. Again, like Christian mentions, like, he wants it to be for her pleasure. Like, he wants her to enjoy these things. Like, he doesn't want to do these things and have her not enjoy them, which is an important aspect to things. I mean, if you're doing these things with somebody and you don't really care if they enjoy them or not, and you actually like it that they don't enjoy them, that's a different thing than wanting to show up and have a sexual experience with somebody that might be more taboo or more out there, but you actually do want this person to enjoy the experience with you. Those are two very different things. Again, I'm just touching on some of these things. This is not a whole video just about BDSM, but I don't have any personal experience with BDSM, so I'm just talking about these things more in the theory of it. But there is a difference between like violence and wanting to play in some of these fetishes. And I mean, I also think it's really important to make sure you're careful and cautious about who you engage in any sexual activity with, whether it be something that is like wildly kinky or whether it just be like, you know, vanilla sex. I mean, I think it's really important that you trust the person that you're with. The big red flag that I see with Christian, that again, it's a fantasy, it's a movie, it's a female fantasy. So in a female fantasy, kind of like all bets are off, right? Because it's a fantasy, so anything can happen. You can make the story go however you want it. The big real life fantasy that I see as being big issue with Christian, because this is a lesson I've learned a lot over the years, and I want people to be really aware of it, is Christian's words and his actions don't always align. Christian says he doesn't do the girlfriend thing, says he doesn't actually like spend the night or sleep with someone, like actually sleep overnight with someone. Like he'll have sex, but then he has to sleep in separate beds. Says he doesn't do relationships, says he doesn't do romance, says all these things, and then he does all those things. He ends up spending the night sleeping with Anna. He calls Anna his girlfriend. He is very romantic. Now, I've personally experienced kind of the opposite, where I have men who say that they're romantic or say that they do all these things or say they want to be a provider or say these things, and then they don't do them, right? When the words and the actions don't align, big warning sign. And I know, I get it, that like so many women, they either hear the words, I fall for words all the time. I've done that before. It's something I've had to learn not to do. Some women fall for the words, and then when the actions don't align, they're like, they hang on to the words. I think for some women, the man will say like, I don't want a relationship, but then he'll act like he's in a relationship, so you hang on to his actions, but you don't listen to his words. Christian's a classic example of that. Like, I don't want a relationship, but then he acts like he's in a relationship. I do believe there are some men who do that unconsciously. They don't really realize, like, because a lot of us are just, I mean, women have unconscious behaviors as well. This isn't like to excuse any kind of toxic behavior from anybody, but many of us are kind of going through life and we're not really consciously aware that our words and our actions are not lining up, because, you know, we kind of just say what we're thinking in the moment, and then we do what we're inclined to do in the moment. We don't really pay attention to those things. You don't really want someone who's that unconscious, right? You don't really want someone who's that not self-aware of what's going on for them or in the world or in their life. You want someone who's aware. Now, there are some people who are fully aware that their words and actions are not aligning, and they're actually lying to manipulate you. There's gaslighting. There's a lot of manipulation and narcissistic abuse. That does happen as well. They're coming from two different places, a man being unconscious or a man being, you know, a manipulative abuser or, you know, gaslighter or somebody who's trying to use you or things like that. They're coming from two different places, but the results are really the same. You're going to end up heartbroken. That for me is a big red flag, and if I can teach anybody anything in this breakdown, it is make sure that a man's words and actions are aligning. If they're not, get out. I'm sure because this is Hollywood, this is probably going to have a Hollywood ending. I don't really know because I don't know how the second two movies actually go or where they take the story exactly. I mean, I hear some of the things that happen, but I don't really know exactly where they take the story. In real life, words and actions need to align. In real life, is Christian too controlling? Yes. Is it still a very sexually polarized relationship? Yes, absolutely. I mean, I really do believe that throughout this movie, Anna really is kind of coming into her own. Like, it is really a coming of age story. Coming of age, I just realized that play on words. Pun not intended, but accidental. It's welcome. But she really is coming into her own as a woman. She's stepping into her boundaries. She's owning her queen-like self as the movie is going on, while still maintaining the playful maiden and everything. I mean, Anna's really owning her feminine energy. She's at that age where she's kind of coming into her own as her feminine energy. She's tapping into her boundaries. She's standing up for herself. She's, you know, speaking her truth. She's saying what she wants. Like, Anna's really kind of developing as a character, even though, you know, the movie itself isn't all that deep. But she's coming into her own. Christian, a lot of wounding. I mean, he's not the most wounded masculine character I've seen in some of these breakdowns, but he does have some wounding. He has a lot of really good masculine qualities, but he clearly has his need to control. He does have a bit of an obsession with perfectionism, things like that. Like, those kind of things they're warning signs of somebody who has some work to do. For somebody who they're trying to portray as having this really like dark, twisted background, he doesn't have quite as much wounding as I would have expected somebody like him to have. It's a female fantasy because this guy has just enough wounding to have an edge to him, but he's still a very masculine man. Like, again, it's a female fantasy. Love or hate this movie. I kind of get why people love it. I kind of get why people hate it. I'm kind of on the fence about it. I mean, there was some great masculine feminine dynamics. I'm gonna try to put some film scenes and some little clips on TikTok and on YouTube. Copyright rules allow me to, so I can kind of show you some of these energies just in their conversation interactions and stuff. So I'll do that on my TikTok and on YouTube if it lets me. If you have any thoughts on this movie, if you really want me to watch the other two, maybe I'll do a follow-up, or any other movie suggestions or anything like that, let me know. Leave a comment in the comment section below. I'd love to hear from you. I'd love your suggestions. If you enjoyed this video and found it helpful, please give it a big thumbs up and be sure you subscribe to my channel. If you're a woman who wants to connect to her feminine energy, I have online courses, details in the description box below, along with links to all my social media accounts. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope you join me next time.